Welcome to the world of rare disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I am a rare disease patient, Rare New England board member, and your host for today's show. Today, our show features Miguel, Sancho, and Felicia Morton. Miguel is an Emmy Award-winning television producer, currently show-running and developing series and specials for A&E. For 7 years, he helped run the ABC primetime news magazine 2020. Prior to that, he was an investigative producer at 2020 and CBS News 48 Hours. Felicia Morton is president and CEO of Morton PR and executive director of the CGD Association of America. Felicia founded the CGD Association of America, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, in 2019 to advocate for patients, carriers, and families affected by chronic granulomatous disease and advanced research. Both Miguel and Felicia live in New York with their 2 children, Lydia and Sebastian. Today, we will discuss Sebastian's rare disease journey and the CGD Association of America. We are thrilled to have the 2 of you here today. Thank you, Miguel and Felicia, for being here. I want to jump right in. Let's start from the beginning. Can we talk a bit about Sebastian, your son, and his health story, and what is CGD and how did it start?
Felicia, why don't you take that?
Okay, well, CGD is Chronic Granulomatous Disease, and it's a rare inherited immune deficiency. And I did not know that I was a carrier. It wasn't until Sebastian started having symptoms at about 6 weeks old that we began our diagnostic odyssey. He began having very high fevers that lasted a long time, and his pediatrician and the doctors could not figure out why. And then he developed abscesses that also were very difficult and involved incision and drainage. And so I pushed for answers and eventually had insisted with my pediatrician that we needed to see an immunologist. And our immunologist diagnosed Sebastian when he was about 6 months old with chronic granulomatous disease. And as I said, it's very rare and affects only 1 out of 200,000 births per year in the United States. And the way it affects children is that they do not have oxidative burst from their neutrophils. They might have some degree of it, but it is arranged. And in Sebastian's case, he had a very severe form of CGD, which means he had almost no oxidative burst from his neutrophil, which are his white blood cells. And so what that means is that he had the inability to fight a handful of bacteria and also fungus, aspergillus fungus, which is the type of fungus you would find in dirt or in lakes and ponds and things of that nature. So we were told that we needed to keep him safe, keep him away from certain things that could be dangerous for him. He needed to take prophylaxis medication every day, which involved antibiotics as well as an antifungal. And after that, we just had to figure out how to manage his disease. And also, we understood that the only cure for it would be a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant. And so we began researching that as well. And so I hope that explains what CGD is and also what our personal experience was.
Right, it sure does. And so that's a lot to take for a 6-month-old. And how, as he grew up, kind of at what point did the transplant discussion become, something you had to really think about? And I don't know, Miguel, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so as Felicia said, Sebastian grew up knowing that he couldn't engage in a lot of activities that normal quote unquote normal kids could, right? We had to keep them away from a lot of things that kids without this disease are able to do without thinking twice. We couldn't, let him play on dirt. We couldn't let him, walk on leaves without shoes. We couldn't let him be in a sandbox. A whole list of restrictions that kind of constrained his early development, including his socialization, right? We had to be very cautious about other kids and whatever symptoms they might be showing at the time. So he wasn't living in a bubble. I don't want to exaggerate, but he definitely had this very constrained lifestyle and a very robust interior world that Felicia kind of helped him cultivate, playing with his train sets, playing with his sister, using his imagination, all these things that people who can't interact with the outside world have to do and have to really build. And it was very impressive, both the way Felicia was able to enable him to do that and the way he embraced it. Nevertheless, despite everything we were doing, the medications and the environmental restrictions, all the precautions, he would get occasional infections that did require intermittent hospitalization. And there are plenty of people who live with the disease. I think it's important to say that there have been all sorts of really impressive developments in the modalities of treatment that enable people to live much longer than they used to with CGD and have relatively functional lives in many cases. But what was going on with Sebastian is that we'd been told that yes, he would be able to kind of hum along for a while, and that while could be 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years. But then it was highly likely that at some point his system was just going to crash. The medications weren't going to do what they were supposed to. And essentially, there was a high likelihood that he wasn't going to really live much past his 20s. Of course, there are, that doesn't take into account what medical developments might happen in that time, but given the current state of affairs. So there was that piece of it. And the other piece of it was living with the condition really was kind of chewing away at the foundations of our family. It was chewing away at our kind of basic sanity, at our kind of emotional stability, the way we were interacting with each other. And so it became quite clear to us when Sebastian was about 2 or 3, if not earlier. We were always considering transplantation, but it became pretty clear to us that it really was the only logical way to proceed if we were going to maximize the chances of both saving our son and saving our family.
Right. Wow. And that's interesting because I think there's so many people who have chronic illness and rare disease in their family and don't necessarily talk about the ins and outs of that. So thank you for sharing. And I know you just wrote a book about that, and there's a lot of the details in there, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So I'd like to just kind of talk. So at what age was it that the transplant became something that you started planning and that you decided to do? Because I do understand that Sebastian has gone through a transplant. It was a huge deal. So I'd love to hear a little bit more of that and, what that experience was like. And I know that's hard to do in a couple minutes, but if you could briefly tell us about, how that went, and also how is Sebastian today?
Sure. I'll give a little my synopsis of it, and then you really should hear Felicia's version too. So it was about 2015 that we really put the wheels in motion, and really I want to give Felicia all the credit for doing the research, determining where we were going to do this. But that was only part of it. The other part was actually finding a match. You can't just go order up a bone marrow transplant the way you can order a McDonald's burger. It's much more difficult, and people focus on all the great stories of success, but there's plenty of situations where people can't find donors, okay? And we were one of those. We had to, in order to find a donor, we couldn't actually use the traditional methods of either a sibling match or a matched unrelated donor. We had to explore the possibility of using umbilical cord blood, which is exactly what is being done with amazing success at Duke University Hospital and other facilities. But Duke is, I would say, definitely the leading hospital. So for us, it was kind of the option of last resort. We went back and forth with it. There's a whole kind of approach avoidance conflict when you talk about committing to some sort of medical intervention that's severe. And for people who don't know, a stem cell transplant involves eliminating the existing immune system with intense chemotherapy, in our case, finding a match donor, making sure that those new donor cells are engrafted and infused properly, and then rebuilding basically from scratch an entirely new immune system with all the risks and potential setbacks that can accrue in the course of that year-long process. So that's kind of what we were kind of contemplating as we arrived at Duke in somewhat challenging circumstances, because Sebastian was actually sick when we went down there originally for the meet and greet. And what turned into a meet and greet turned into the real deal, an 8-month stay down there. And I'll let Felicia describe a little bit about what that process was.
Yeah. So to answer your question, we had started thinking about curative options right away. You know, I definitely had, and I began talking to other CGD mothers, talking to CGD organizations, a CGD organization called the CGD Association. I run the CGD Association of America. The CGD Association is now defunct, but and also the Immune Deficiency Foundation, just gathering as much information as I could, interviewing the centers of excellence for transplants for patients who had CGD around the country. And so after gathering all of these data and systemizing it in a way where I understood what the process was, understood what the success rate was that these centers had, understood their experience in CGD specifically, understood the different options for us, and realizing we really only had unrelated umbilical cord blood as our option. That narrowed it down to Duke University Hospital for us. And as Miguel said, Sebastian was starting to have more illnesses. And towards the end, when we were going for this meet and greet, he had a fever. And I was very concerned. It just seemed like one of the worst illnesses he had. The fever was higher than it had been in years, and his cough was severe. And it was one of those things with CGD where the local doctors, the pediatricians, the emergency room could not diagnose him. They thought he looked fine. But that's the terrifying thing about CGD and many immune deficiencies. You can look fine, and you might not, there might not be even anything that shows up on an x-ray, a lung x-ray, but the child, in fact, can be very sick. And that was what was happening to Sebastian. He had 12 granulomas on his lungs that were only found during a CAT scan when we were at Duke. And so that's what landed us at Duke. We were only supposed to be here for 3 days. We ended up spending 9 months.
Wow.
And
how old was Sebastian at this time?
And he was 4 at the time.
Okay.
So that was how we got to Duke. It wasn't expected, but we were so fortunate that we were there in time. They were able to treat his life-threatening infection, number one, and then they were able to prepare him to have a successful transplant.
Wow. And that is remarkable. And I know you told me in earlier that you all live in New York City or New York, and you had to move down to North Carolina for that time, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's something that I advocate now through my work with the CGD Association of America. I speak to a lot of families of rare disease, and being close to a hospital that has experience with your particular disease is absolutely vital. It's very challenging, of course, to move, to go to that hospital. But we were, as you said, we lived in New York City at the time. We were in the suburbs, but we thought we were in the center of everything living in New York. And there really isn't as much experience in our particular rare disease here in our state. And so, or in the tri-state area, especially if you don't have an unrelated donor, really we needed to go to Duke, where they specialize in not only CGD, but for families like us who don't have a bone marrow match. And so that's what I often tell families, that just go, no matter what it takes, you know, if you can, just go to the Center for Excellence for your particular rare disease. It's really worth it if you can.
Great. That is excellent advice. And in my personal experience, I had a very similar situation, and I often tell people that as well. Like if there is an expert that you can find, that's where you need to be. And it's not easy to do, especially if it's a geographical distance and you have a family, but I do appreciate those words. So can we talk a little bit, Sebastian today, how is he today?
Well, so we say this with the full understanding that not everybody has the same outcome, and not everybody has the outcome that we had. We were very, very fortunate in many ways. And the short answer is, it's basically like it never happened. He is, completely, functioning. His immune system, rather, is completely functional. In fact, it's, a wonderfully kind of cultivated, homegrown immune system. He is growing. He has no restrictions. He doesn't need to take any medicines.
Wow.
He got through COVID just fine. We didn't have to sweat that too hard. The one thing that we need to do with any transplant patient who's had chemotherapy, he needs to be monitored every year to make sure that there's no long-term damage to his organ function from the chemo. And so far, that's been great too. It is broadly considered the case that if you have transplant when you're young and you have the chemo when you're young, the odds of long-term side effects are considerably diminished compared to people who have it when they're older.
Great. I hope it stays that way for him. And, that's a remarkable story. And I'm sure that story, while, there's that feeling that, wow, we were very fortunate to be in this situation. I'm sure it provides hope to other patients and families, because I think sometimes in our world, that is something we all need. So I wanted to.
I'm sorry, just one other thing I can add is that he is changed in a significant way, in that he is this rather remarkable specimen of science, in that he is a creature, an organism that has two different kinds of DNA in his body at the same time. His blood cells are from the donor DNA, and the rest of his body, his hair, his skin, his organs, are from us. So they call that chimerism in medicine. And that is just one of those many things that kind of blew my mind about the whole process as we dove headfirst into this world of immunology and rare disease and transplantation.
Wow,
So
yeah.
he's different in that regard.
Right. So yes, he is very rare in many ways. So I know I want to touch briefly upon your careers. They have changed, but I wanted to talk. I know you mentioned it, Felicia, but the CGD Association of America. I know you're working with that now, and I'd love to hear about the organization and the mission and what you're doing.
Yes, thank you. So I started the CGD Association of America because I knew what it felt like to get this diagnosis when I held my precious 6-month-old infant who looked like just the perfect healthy cherub. I just felt, words can't describe how devastated I was and how alone and isolated. And I reached out immediately to different organizations, and they were like a lifeline to me to talk to other moms who had been through this. And unlike other rare diseases where there's more of a prescribed path, with CGD, you can live with the disease or you can explore curative options. And it's really up to the family or the patient to make that decision. And it's a tremendous burden. The only way that families and patients can make that decision is through information. And so my mission through the CGD Association of America is to ensure that we provide information so that patients and families can make decisions, not only for patients, but for carriers as well. The new research is coming out regarding CGD carriers, female X-linked CGD carriers, not just of CGD, but many X-linked rare diseases. Women were previously thought to be asymptomatic, and now research is showing that we in fact are not. And so we're also raising awareness for our women and girls, and putting our efforts towards more research to help ensure that their needs are met as well from a healthcare perspective.
Excellent. That's great. And where would somebody find, do you have a website that we can direct people to learn more about that?
Yes, it's CGDAA.org.
Okay, perfect. That's great to know. And we're going to be doing another episode with Miguel and Felicia talking about Miguel's book, but I wanted you just to mention that to our viewers, please, Miguel. Can you tell us about your book and really what is it about and why should somebody go pick it up?
Right. So the book is called More Than You Can Handle, a rare disease, a family in crisis, and the cutting edge medicine that cured the incurable. And it's essentially our story, but it also includes the stories of other families who we met along the way, and also goes a fair amount into the science and the innovations that are taking place in this world of transplantation and immunology. And the reason I wrote the book is because a lot of the times when we'd heard stories about rare disease families, it had been kind of asserted and presumed that the families were somehow able to tap into this magically infinite reservoir of strength and fortitude and compassion and love and bonding. And we knew both from our own experience and from the stories that we'd heard from other families that we met along our journey that that's not often the case. It's often the case that these things tear families apart and they lead to all sorts of individual and familial problems.
That's a lot to put in a book and to put out there, because I know it's makes you vulnerable and makes it, but it does make it real. And I think that there are so many people, I mean, just in everyday life, but especially dealing with medical crises, who are, trying to figure out how does everybody get through it, not just the child, but the parents and the sibling and the extended family. It is something that touches everybody. And I think by writing a book about that, that is something that people understand. So we're going to wrap up this show, but I do want to give each of you a last sentence, a last piece of advice of something you might want to share with our viewers, maybe some advice for other patients and families, or some last words just to leave our viewers with. I'll start with you, Felicia.
There is the opportunity to tap into something when you go through something like this. I talk a lot about my faith, and Miguel touches upon that in the book. I did experience something very profound, and I did. I really did feel that my faith was a tremendous source of peace for me throughout this experience. And I worked really hard to, keep our family together, to not go down some of these paths that were really destructive, and to ensure that we created a sense of peace for the children as well, not only Sebastian, but for his sister. And sometimes siblings, oftentimes, in fact, will get we'll have issues related to this. And we really tried to see those. I tried to see those and ensure that she was included. And we listened to the experts on this to ensure that she didn't get a lot of ill effects from this experience as well. So in terms of the advice that I have for families, you just never know until you're involved in something like this, but it can be, as odd as it might sound, a gift, because it taps into something deep within all of us, and we create a bond with our children through this experience that is truly transformative. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for all of the people that we met along the way who have just given themselves to us from a medical perspective, from a friend perspective. The care and compassion that we experience, I don't know if I'll ever experience that again. And many people in their lifetimes have never experienced that again, but it's truly life affirming to see that, but and also from strangers, not just friends, family, doctors, but from strangers, the outpouring of love and affection and care that we had. So all I can do to in my life is to pay that forward in some way. And if I can do that through the CGD Association of America, if Miguel can do that with his book to give people hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, I hope that would suffice in terms of all the things that we want to say, in terms of how grateful we are for all the blessings we've received.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Miguel?
Well, I would just say that, one of the lessons that that we kind of took away is that, these things rock your world and shake you to your foundations, and you have to just kind of humble yourself and accept the fact that you are not made of steel, and that you very well might need help. And whether that help is either faith or therapy or some sort of medication, or just really plunging into the science and learning and getting educated, which is its own form, I think, of therapy and empowerment. These are all things that people should do, and you should do as many of them as you feel like you need to. And you should feel free to hopscotch around to whatever modality of help that works best for you, without feeling that you're being inadequate or unfaithful to one kind of practice. Personally, meditation helped me a lot and continues to help me. But that's just one of a number of things that we tried. And then I also really just want people to be optimistic, because there are these amazing breakthroughs that are happening at an accelerating pace. COVID obviously was a worldwide disaster, and we mourn the loss of every life. But we came up with a very effective set of vaccines within 9 months using this wonderful technology called messenger RNA, and that, which is the culmination of decades of research that just happened to kind of find its moment in the sun. And there will be more cures, there will be more lives saved for all sorts of other diseases going forward, with vaccines, with gene therapy, with new modalities in transplantation. So there is hope, and there is reason for both optimism about the future and also respect and gratitude for the people. And I say the people, I don't just mean the doctors and the researchers, but the patients who suffered and sacrificed to get us to where we are today.
Absolutely. And can you just tell our readers where they might be able to find your book?
Oh, absolutely. So it's on Amazon. It's on barnesandnoble.com. It's in many local bookstores. And you can also check it out on the Penguin Random House website. And my personal website is www.miguelsancho.net, which has a bunch of information about the book and ways to buy it too. So if you just Google "More Than You Can Handle," it should pop.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here. I think we just had a little bit of a sneak preview of the experience and what will be in the book. And we're very happy that you shared it with the world of rare disease. So thank you.
No, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Before closing, we provide our viewers with an opportunity to share comments and ask questions from our prior shows. Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. If you have questions and comments, please reach out to Rare New England at info@rarenewengland.org. Our show would not be possible without the generous sponsors that sponsor our show. This includes Pfizer, Ultragenics, Vertex, Horizon, and the law offices of Weiner, Jackson, and Simmons. Thank you for your continued support. We are always looking for other sponsors and guests, so please reach out with any inquiries. Thank you again, Felicia and Miguel, for being here today. It was a pleasure. From all of us at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, and then think zebras. Thank you.